On March 18, 1925, spring planting schedules governed life across southeastern Missouri, southern Illinois, and southwestern Indiana. Small towns along rail corridors maintained schools, businesses, and warehouses constructed of unreinforced masonry and timber frame. Tornado events in the region were recognized but considered brief, localized phenomena lasting minutes and affecting narrow paths. No warning infrastructure existed. Communication between towns relied on telegraph lines vulnerable to physical damage. The prevailing assumption held that atmospheric disturbances would dissipate naturally or fragment into discontinuous cells. Normal operations continued across a 350-kilometer corridor that afternoon. The Midwest corridor between the Mississippi River and the Wabash River contained dispersed agricultural settlements and concentrated town centers. Missouri's southeast corner held populations in Annapolis and rural clusters. Southern Illinois presented higher settlement density with incorporated towns including Murfreesboro, DeSoto, West Frankfort, and Parrish. Southwestern Indiana included Griffin, Owensville, and Princeton. Buildings followed standard construction methods: brick commercial blocks, wood frame residences, single-story schools without reinforced foundations. Rail networks connected population centers for coal transport and agricultural distribution. Population density ranged from isolated farmsteads to towns of several thousand residents. Infrastructure assumed routine weather variability, not sustained destructive force. A deep surface low-pressure system moved northeast from the southern plains on March 18th. Atmospheric soundings would have revealed extreme instability, dew points exceeding 60 degrees Fahrenheit, surface temperatures near 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and strong southerly low-level winds transporting Gulf moisture. A vigorous shortwave trough aloft provided forcing mechanisms. Wind shear profiles showed strong directional and speed shear through the troposphere, creating conditions for supercell development. The combination of instability parameters and wind shear exceeded thresholds associated with violent tornado production. No observational network existed to quantify these parameters in real time. Conditions favorable for sustained tornadic supercells developed across the lower Mississippi Valley by early afternoon. The atmospheric environment supported exceptional updraft rotation and maintenance. Tornadogenesis occurred near Ellington, Missouri at approximately 1 p.m. local time. Initial reports described a funnel cloud descending from a dark base. The circulation achieved ground contact and immediately intensified. Forward motion exceeded typical tornado translation speeds from the onset. The vortex maintained continuous ground contact without cyclic behavior or dissipation. Damage indicators showed violent intensity classification from the earliest affected structures. The tornado moved along a northeast vector at approximately 100 kilometers per hour, far exceeding normal tornado movement rates of 50 to 60 kilometers per hour. No lifting or rope-out phase interrupted the circulation. The combination of rotational intensity and translation speed created a continuously advancing destruction path. Missouri communities had no advance notification. The tornado's forward speed represented a critical deviation from typical tornadic behavior. Most tornadoes exhibit intermittent ground contact or slower translation, allowing brief warning windows. This system maintained 100 kilometers per hour forward motion while sustaining violent intensity winds. The combination meant affected areas experienced only seconds between visual acquisition and impact. The time from horizon appearance to structure failure compressed to under 1 minute for most locations. Continuous ground contact eliminated damage gaps that typically allow emergency response staging. The tornado crossed terrain without weakening over forested areas or elevation changes. Atmospheric conditions along the track remained supportive for 3 hours. The system functioned as a continuously translating destruction mechanism across 350 kilometers without interruption. The tornado's path intersected critical infrastructure networks repeatedly. Telegraph lines suffered immediate severance upon impact, isolating downstream communities from warnings. Rail corridors running parallel to the tornado track experienced direct hits on switching stations and water towers.
The Illinois Central Railroad and Baltimore and Ohio Railroad lines crossed the damage path multiple times. Power distribution systems, where present, failed immediately. Coal mining operations in southern Illinois lost surface structures and equipment. The sequential destruction of communication nodes prevented message relay between towns. Towns 30 kilometers ahead remained unaware of approaching conditions. The infrastructure network assumed localized damage, not coordinated system-wide failure. No redundant communication pathways existed. Each town entered the event informationally isolated.
Murfreesboro, Illinois, population approximately 11,000, received impact at 2:34 p.m. without warning. The business district's masonry buildings collapsed within seconds. DeSoto, 16 kilometers northeast, was struck 10 minutes later. West Frankfort experienced impact at approximately 3 p.m. Parrish, a mining community, was destroyed minutes afterward. Griffin, Indiana, was struck near 4 p.m. Each town experienced total surprise. The interval between impacts prevented organized evacuation or preparation. Destruction patterns showed complete structural failure across damage paths 1 to 2 kilometers wide. Schools collapsed during afternoon sessions. The tornado maintained intensity through each urban center without weakening. Sequential impacts overwhelmed regional response capacity. Towns that might have sent aid were themselves affected. The geographic distribution prevented resource concentration.
No meteorological warning system existed in 1925. The U.S. Weather Bureau prohibited tornado forecasts, considering them impossible and potentially panic-inducing. Local observation networks could not track storm movement. The tornado's speed exceeded any possible human communication relay. Telegraph operators in destroyed towns could not transmit warnings. Subsequent communities had no information about upstream conditions. Rural populations lacked even basic shelter options. Schools and public buildings offered no protective spaces. Emergency response protocols assumed localized incidents, manageable by local resources. The concept of coordinated multi-county disaster response did not exist. Medical facilities in affected areas suffered structural damage simultaneously with casualty generation. Fire departments lost equipment and personnel. The tornado moved faster than any organized response could form. The tornado killed 695 people across 3 states. Missouri recorded 11 deaths, Illinois 613, Indiana 71. Injury counts exceeded 2,000. Murfreesboro alone recorded 234 deaths. The Longfellow School in Murfreesboro collapsed, killing students. Parrish lost half its population. Casualty concentrations occurred where the tornado struck during school hours or business operations. The width of the damage path and building fragility prevented survival in many structures. Approximately 15,000 people lost homes. Property damage exceeded $16.5 million in 1925 currency. 164 square kilometers experienced direct impact. Farms, towns, and infrastructure across the entire path required reconstruction. The casualty distribution reflected population density variations, structural vulnerability, and timing. The event remains the deadliest single tornado in U.S. recorded history. The tornado dissipated near Petersburg, Indiana at approximately 4:30 p.m. after 3.5 hours of continuous contact. Atmospheric conditions supporting the supercell weakened as the system moved beyond peak instability. Immediate aftermath presented communications blackout across the affected corridor. Outside communities learned of the disaster through disrupted telegraph signals and witness reports. Emergency response required coordination across 3 state governments. Federal assistance frameworks were minimal in 1925. Reconstruction depended on local capacity and private resources. The American Red Cross coordinated relief operations. The event prompted no immediate changes to tornado forecasting policy. Weather Bureau restrictions on tornado warnings remained until 1950. The official track length measured 352 kilometers across Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana. Modern analysis suggests the event may have been a tornado family, a series of tornadoes produced by a single supercell, rather than one continuous vortex, though this remains debated.
Damage surveys rated the tornado F5 on the Fujita scale, retroactively applied decades later. The tornado maintained an average width of 1.2 kilometers. Forward speed averaged 100 kilometers per hour, with periods exceeding 115 kilometers per hour. The event established records for longest damage path, highest death toll, and fastest forward motion for U.S. tornadoes. The National Weather Service maintains official documentation classifying it as a single tornado. The 1925 tri-state tornado remains the benchmark extreme event for tornado duration and impact scope.